Continuing our introduction to SVG, we are now going to play with simple shapes. I recommend you check out the previous video first, because there are a few things covered in that I do expect you to know before we move into this. So what shapes are we going to make? We're going to make rectangles, squares, and circles. I'm not saying these are the only shapes that we can make, but these are the shapes that we're going to start with. So what do you need? Launch up your text editor. Once again, text edit notepad, brackets, an online tool, but no Word, no WordPad, no pages. And we're also going to start using comments in this. So if you're not familiar with a comment, we use it to make things clear, talk about what we're doing. It can be used to make your code more legible, which is important because what if you're busy and you don't get back to this for a couple weeks and you want to try to figure out what you did later? Or what if you're doing something really advanced and maybe a year down the line you have to come back and modify something? Being able to go through your code easily, simply, quickly can save a lot of time and a lot of headache, and using comments is the best way to do that. So that way you can identify where you're creating what. Now, we're doing really simple stuff right now, so it might seem silly to use comments for something so simple, but if you had something that was 1,000 lines of code, comments would be something to be very thankful for. And if you don't start using comments when you're doing things simply, you're not going to have a habit of doing it, and when you start to build more complex things, you're probably going to forget. Now, even if you don't think that you need comments for yourself, it's not unusual for coders to work with other people. In the industry, coders do work with other people, and they need to be able to read each other's code, and they shouldn't have to try to figure it out. It should be clear, and comments help make that happen. And it's pretty much an expectation in the industry now, so unless you're going to work for yourself, your boss, your supervisor, your manager, your coworkers are going to expect you to use comments. So you should do it. And this is what a comment looks like in SVG. So let's go ahead and open up our text editor. Once again, we're going to start by wrapping our SVG code in an HTML file just to make things a little simpler. So HTML inside of a left angle bracket and a right angle bracket, and we need to close this. So there's our closing tag. Inside of there, we're going to have a body element, and once again we need to close that. And then finally, we can actually start our SVG elements. And we also need the closing tag for that. So we have HTML, we have body, we have SVG. Now inside of here, I'm going to add my comments. Creating a rectangle. There's my comment. That's the first thing that we're going to create is a rectangle. So the code for this is pretty straightforward. It's rect. That will create a rectangle for us. Now, just like when we tried creating Hello World, we need to have some things in there so that way we can actually see it. That does include the X and Y coordinates, so maybe 50 and 30. And if we close this tag, we can see what happens. Command S for save, and let's call this shapes.html. Here it is, and if we open it, we don't see anything. Now the issue is we needed more than just the X and the Y. We also need a width and a height. We didn't define how big the rectangle should be, so there's probably a rectangle there, and it's probably 0 by 0. So width equals, let's maybe do 20, and height, let's do maybe 40. Maybe it'll be twice as tall as it is wide. So if we save it and we reopen it, there we go. I have a rectangle. Now you can play with where it's positioned if you want. You can try out different spaces. I'm going to move this over a little bit. So maybe I want it to be only 10 wide, and I want it to start at Y10. and this will be at x60, and we can refresh, and you can see how it'll move around. Now if we delete this x and y, keep in mind it's going to start at 0, 0. But there's a difference between the shapes and the text elements. If we refresh, it does start at 0, 0, but when it's loading the rectangle, it starts loading it at the top and then draws down and across. So we still see this whole rectangle even though it's at 0, 0, unlike the text. So SVG is not entirely consistent in what point it's drawing from. The next thing that I want to show is how to draw a square. So you might be thinking, like, do we actually write the whole word square? Is it S-Q-U-A-R-E? Is it short? Is it only the first 4 letters? Maybe S-Q-U-A? Or is it like abbreviated, like S-Q-R? Well, actually, there's no square element. So every square is a rectangle, but not every rectangle is a square. And what I mean by that is a rectangle is just a 4-sided shape where the corners are 90 degrees, regardless of height and width. All a square is it's just a special rectangle where the height and width are the same. All we do, let's add another comment here, creating a square. We just make another rectangle, and we just make the width and the height to be the exact same. Now I'm not going to load this yet because right now these two would be right on top of each other, so I need to give them some space away from each other. So maybe let's put the x at, well, at least 10, because the width of this is 10, so like 20. And you know, the y doesn't really matter. I think I'll leave the y out. So now if I load this, now notice I didn't close this element. There is no /rect. This element does not need a closing tag. It is a single tag for this element. Instead, this element is closed by adding a slash at the end of it. I know it can get a little confusing, but as you play with it more, you'll get used to it. So Command S, open my file here with Firefox, and there we go. We have our rectangle, and we have our special rectangle that's a square right next to it. Right, and the last thing that I want to add for right now is a circle. So circles are a little more special. Circles don't use an X and a Y, they use a CX and a CY. That is the center X and the center Y, because circles are round, and so it gets, I guess, a little difficult to figure out where maybe the top left of the circle would be, or would that point actually be on the top left of the circle? Would it not be in that top deleted point? Like, would it not be a square around a circle and instead along the radius? They just decided it'd be easier to stick that point that you're drawing it at in the middle of the circle, and instead of defining the width and the height, we instead define the radius. So create a little bit more space in our text file. We're going to start with a comment once again, creating a circle. Let's be consistent. If I'm going to be lowercase, let's continue being lowercase. And now we can define our circle. So the element name for a circle is actually circle. And we need the CX. So let's make that maybe, let's go with 25. Because that should put it in the center of this square, because the x plus half of the width. And let's do the CY And that needs to be at least, well, more than 20. Actually, even more than that because of however big the circle is going to be. So let's say maybe, I don't know, I'm just going to guesstimate to be 40. And then we need the radius. So I want my radius to be, I think, 10. So that way it should be the same width total as the square, because radius is only half the circle. So that should put it the same width as the square. So let's see if I got all of that right. Open with Firefox. There we go. Well, I don't like how far down it is. That is not how big of a gap I meant to be there. But you get the idea, right? So you could tweak that a little bit if you wanted to try to change how much space there is. And of course, depending on how zoomed in you are on your browser, yours might be really, really, really small. You can either zoom in on your browser, or you can of course just increase the value of these numbers. So maybe if we put like a 0 after everything, that's gonna make everything a whole lot bigger, right? Whoa, there you go. It is actually bigger than my canvases. And we can talk about canvases a little bit later. So I think for now we'll stick with it being small. Now, what if you don't want all of these to be black? Other colors do exist, right? Surely SVG has them. Of course SVG has them. So for right now, we can add to these a fill attribute. So there are different ways that colors work on the computer. We're not going to get into those right now. We'll get into those into the next video. But right now, we're just going to give it names of colors. So like fill red. So this is going to be creating a red rectangle. And maybe we want the fill on this one to be blue. So then we're going to make this creating a blue square. And maybe fill on this one is green. So creating a green circle. So if we Command S and we refresh, oh no, what happened to my green? Oh, I accidentally put it after the slash. Command S. Ah, the problem is actually up here. I put this one after the slash as well on accident. Command S. There we go. Better. Pay attention to where your slashes are. It'll make things easier. Alright, so that's it for this video, but that doesn't have to be it for you. Once again, you can play with this. You can try things out. What happens if you put one shape on top of another? If they're both black, you might not be able to tell, but what about if you have different colors for them? Which one sits on top of which? Or do the two colors blend? Try it out. Playing with different shapes and different sizes, can you figure out how big our workspace is? And what colors can you use? I used red, green, and blue, but what about yellow? I'm sure that probably works. What about something a little less common, like fuchsia, or cerulean, or cyan, magenta? What colors are there? And can you add color to the text element that we played with in the previous video? Try it. If you're really feeling artistic and ambitious, or you just want more practice getting the hang of this and how to use X and Y and the width and the height, maybe you look up the work by P.A. Mondrian and try to recreate it. What you do with this is up to you. Thanks for watching. In the next video, we're going to talk about color and how to really customize color more than just using the names of colors.